The rain fell relentlessly that evening, turning the small town's cracked sidewalks into mirrors of trembling light. Inside a dim cafe at the corner of Maple Street, a man sat hunched over a half-empty cup of coffee that had long gone cold. His name was Daniel Brooks. A mechanic, a father, and lately, a man losing his fight with hope. He rubbed his rough hands together, his nails blackened from grease, and glanced at the clock above the counter. 8:17 p.m., he was late, again. His son, Ethan, would be waiting in the school gym after basketball practice, probably wondering if his dad had forgotten him. Daniel sighed, pushed back his chair, and reached for his worn jacket. "Another long night, huh?" the waitress asked softly, noticing the deep lines of exhaustion carved into his face. "Yeah," he replied with a tired half-smile. "Just another one." As he stepped out into the rain, his boots splashing in puddles, Daniel's thoughts circled like vultures. Bills he couldn't pay, a car that wouldn't start without prayer, and a landlord who had run out of patience. Ever since his wife Claire died 3 years ago, life had been a constant storm. He worked 2 jobs, sometimes 3, just to keep food on the table for his boy. But still, it never felt like enough. When he reached the gym, the lights were dimmed, and Ethan was sitting on the bleachers, dribbling a basketball idly. He looked up when Daniel entered, his face lighting up for a moment before dimming again at the sight of his father's drenched clothes. "You forgot, didn't you?" Ethan muttered, voice small but cutting. Daniel's chest tightened. "No, buddy, I didn't forget. Got held up at the shop again. I'm sorry." Ethan shrugged, pretending it didn't matter, but the disappointment in his eyes told another story. "It's fine," he said, grabbing his bag. "Coach already gave me a ride offer, but I waited." Daniel forced a smile, trying to hide the shame gnawing inside him. "I'll make it up to you this weekend, yeah. Maybe some fishing at the lake." But Ethan only nodded without enthusiasm. The silence that followed was heavy. Too heavy for a boy who used to laugh at everything. They were walking toward the car when Daniel noticed something across the street. A wedding venue. Brightly lit through the rain. Outside, under the awning, a small crowd had gathered, their whispers slicing through the night air. And then Daniel saw her. A young woman in a white wedding dress sat in a wheelchair near the entrance, her veil soaked, mascara running down her cheeks. Guests surrounded her, murmuring awkward condolences. The groom was nowhere to be seen. Daniel slowed to a stop, frozen in place. There was something about her. Something hauntingly familiar. Her trembling hands clutched a bouquet of white lilies. Crushed and wilted, as if the world had just collapsed on her shoulders. Ethan followed his father's gaze. "Dad, what's going on?" Daniel didn't answer. His eyes were locked on the bride as she tried to steady herself, her lips quivering. A middle-aged woman, perhaps her mother, was trying to comfort her, but the bride shook her head and whispered, "He left. He just left." The words hit Daniel like thunder. His gut twisted, and a rush of memories flooded back. Claire's final days in the hospital. The helplessness of watching someone you love fade before your eyes. The desperate wish to take away their pain but being utterly powerless. The bride tried to wheel herself away, her hands trembling so violently that she almost fell. Without thinking, Daniel rushed forward. Hey, careful," he said, kneeling beside her as she struggled with the chair's wheels. She looked up at him, startled, her teary eyes locking with his. There was something fragile yet fierce about her, something that made Daniel's heart ache. "I'm fine," she whispered, her voice brittle. "Please, just leave me alone." But he didn't move. He saw the way her lip quivered, the raw pain she tried to hide. "No one deserves to be left out here like this," he said softly. "Not on a night like this." For a moment, neither spoke. The world around them blurred. The rain, the murmurs, the lights fading into a haze of sorrow and disbelief. Then, she broke. Her shoulders shook, and a sob escaped her lips. Daniel hesitated, unsure if he should reach out. He wanted to offer comfort. But he was a stranger, a soaked, broke mechanic standing beside a bride whose future had just shattered. Yet something deep inside told him this moment wasn't random. Ethan watched silently from the curb, confusion etched on his young face. The bride wiped her tears, trying to regain her composure. "You don't even know me," she said, her voice trembling. Daniel gave a faint smile. "Maybe not. But I know what it feels like to lose something you thought would last forever." Her eyes softened, just a fraction. "He left me," she murmured. "Right before the vows. Said he couldn't handle a lifetime of this." She gestured weakly to the wheelchair. Daniel's breath caught. "He said that." She nodded, fresh tears glistening in her lashes. He said love wasn't enough if I couldn't walk beside him. Daniel's throat tightened. He didn't have words. Just a burning anger for whoever could abandon a heart like hers. For a long moment, they sat there, the sound of rain filling the silence. And then, out of nowhere, Ethan walked over and handed her his jacket. "You look cold," the boy said quietly. The bride blinked, surprised, and smiled faintly through her tears. "Thank you." Daniel looked at his son, then back at her. He didn't know her name, didn't know her story beyond this heartbreak. But something inside him shifted. It was as if fate had drawn two broken souls to the same storm. And as he knelt there beside her, rain dripping from his hair, Daniel whispered the words that would change everything. "You're my miracle." The words hung between them. Fragile, impossible. Yet full of truth neither could explain. The words left Daniel's lips before he could stop them. "You're my miracle." They weren't rehearsed or rational. They came from somewhere deeper, somewhere that had been buried beneath years of loss and quiet despair. The bride blinked, unsure if she'd heard correctly. Her tear-streaked face reflected confusion, grief, and a flicker of something Daniel hadn't seen in her eyes before, hope. What did you just say?" she whispered, almost afraid to believe it. Daniel exhaled, realizing how absurd it must have sounded. He rubbed the back of his neck, glancing away. "Sorry. I didn't mean, it's just." He looked back at her, meeting her gaze. "I've been walking around for years thinking miracles don't happen anymore. Then I see someone left like this. Hurting. Still strong enough to hold her head up. And I realize maybe they still do." For a second, the rain seemed to pause. The bride stared at him, her lips trembling as if she wanted to speak but couldn't. Ethan shifted uncomfortably beside his father, watching this strange connection unfold. Finally, she managed to whisper, "My name's Lily." "Daniel," he replied softly. "And this is my son, Ethan." Ethan gave a small nod, shy and uncertain. He wasn't sure what to make of this woman in a torn wedding dress and his father's sudden tenderness toward her. But even at 12, he could feel that something important was happening. Something that went beyond words. Daniel glanced toward the wedding hall. The once glowing chandeliers had dimmed. Guests were leaving in awkward silence, their umbrellas forming dark silhouettes against the fading light. The laughter and music that should have filled this night were gone, replaced by rain and heartbreak. "Come on," Daniel said gently. "Let's get you out of the cold." Lily hesitated. "I can't go home, not like this. Everyone's there, family, friends, they'll just look at me with pity." He thought for a moment, then said, "There's a cafe nearby. Warm coffee, dry air. No expectations." She stared at him, uncertain whether to trust this stranger, this mechanic who'd appeared out of nowhere. But something about his eyes, the quiet kindness in them, told her she could. With a nod, she let him wheel her toward his old pickup parked by the curb. The truck was ancient, the paint peeling. One headlight fogged from years of wear. Ethan opened the passenger door while Daniel lifted Lily gently into the seat, her wet gown rustling softly. For a brief moment her hand brushed his, and he felt the faintest tremor in her touch. "Sorry," she murmured. "Don't be," he said. "Everyone needs a hand sometimes." As they drove through the quiet streets, Lily stared out the rain-streaked window. The world outside blurred into lights and shadows. She felt numb, as if her body were still sitting in that wheelchair, stuck at the altar where her future had vanished. "I don't understand how he could do that," she said suddenly, her voice breaking. "We planned everything. Every detail. I thought he loved me enough to stay. But the moment I needed him most." She swallowed hard. He walked away. Daniel tightened his grip on the steering wheel. "Then he didn't deserve you," he said firmly. Lily looked at him, surprised by the conviction in his tone. "People show who they are when things get hard," he continued. "Some run. Some stayed. The ones who stay, they're the ones who matter." Ethan watched his father speak, noticing the flicker of pain behind his words. He'd heard that tone before. When his dad talked about his mom. When he thought Ethan wasn't listening. They reached the cafe. It was nearly empty, save for the same waitress from earlier, who looked startled when she saw Daniel come in with a woman in a wedding gown. "Rough night," she murmured as they settled at a corner booth. "You could say that," Daniel replied quietly. Lily sat silently, her hands clasped around a cup of coffee she barely sipped. The warmth seeped into her fingers, but her heart still felt frozen. Daniel sat across from her, watching the faint tremor in her hands. Ethan doodled on a napkin, pretending not to listen. Finally, Lily spoke. I used to think love meant never being alone again. But maybe it just means finding someone who won't leave, even when you're broken. Daniel smiled faintly. Then you still believe in it? She looked up, eyes glistening. Do you? He paused, the question cutting deep. I used to. My wife Claire, she was everything. Then one day, cancer came and took her away. I thought that was it. No more love. No more miracles. He gave a dry chuckle. Wes, I was wrong. Lily's gaze softened. I'm sorry, she whispered. He shook his head. Don't be. She'd have told me to keep going. But I didn't know how, until tonight. There was silence again. Comfortable, this time. Outside, the rain began to ease, and a soft hum of thunder faded into the distance. Ethan broke the quiet. Dade calls Mom his angel, he said, his voice small. He talks to her sometimes when he thinks I'm asleep. Daniel's eyes widened. Ethan. It's okay. Lily said gently. I think angels listen to us more than we know. Daniel looked at her then, really looked at her. The fragility, the strength, the quiet defiance in her eyes. Something stirred deep within him. Something he thought had died with Claire. When they finally left the cafe, the streets glistened under the amber glow of streetlights. Lily's dress was ruined, her makeup gone. Her heart shattered, but she felt lighter somehow. Daniel lifted her back into the truck, careful, respectful. As he buckled her seatbelt, she said softly, "Thank you. For not walking away." He met her eyes, his voice steady but filled with something unspoken. You deserved someone to stay. As they drove off, Ethan dozed in the back seat. Lily leaned her head against the window, the rhythm of the rain lulling her into calm. She didn't know where she was headed now, or what tomorrow would bring. But for the first time since that awful moment at the altar, she didn't feel completely alone. And Daniel, glancing at her reflection in the side mirror, realized something he hadn't dared to in years. Maybe life was giving him a second chance to believe again. The rain had stopped by the time they reached Daniel's modest apartment on the edge of town. It wasn't much. A peeling door, flickering porch light, and the faint hum of the highway in the distance. But it was home. Lily hesitated when he parked. I don't want to intrude, she said softly. You've already done enough. Daniel turned to her. You're not intruding. You need a place to rest, and I've got a couch that's probably softer than that chair. He smiled, trying to lighten the heaviness in her voice. From the back seat, Ethan rubbed his eyes, still half asleep. Dad. Who is she? Daniel glanced at him in the rearview mirror. She's a friend who needed a little help tonight. Ethan blinked, studying Lily's wedding dress, now dull and wrinkled. She looks like a princess who lost her castle. Lily gave a faint, bittersweet smile. That's not far from the truth. Inside, the apartment smelled faintly of motor oil and instant coffee. There were stacks of unpaid bills on the counter, a faded photo of Claire on the wall, and a pair of small sneakers, kicked under the couch. It wasn't elegant, but it carried warmth, the kind built from survival. Daniel fetched a blanket and offered it to Lily. Here. You can stay as long as you need. The couch isn't fancy, but it's safe. She took the blanket, her hands trembling slightly. Thank you. Really. Don't mention it, he said. You've had a long night. Try to get some rest. As she settled in, Daniel went to tuck Ethan into bed. The boy looked at him curiously. Dad, why did you help her? Daniel paused, brushing his son's hair from his forehead. Because someone should have helped your mom like that if she were alone. Ethan nodded slowly. She's sad. Yeah. Daniel murmured. She is. But maybe we can make her a little less sad. When Daniel returned to the living room, Lily was staring at the photo of Claire on the wall. She's beautiful, she said softly. Daniel followed her gaze. She was. I still talk to her sometimes. Does it help? He thought for a moment. Some nights yes. Others not enough. Lily nodded, understanding more than she wanted to. I used to talk to God like that, especially after the accident. Daniel looked at her, surprised. The accident? She hesitated, her eyes dropping to her lap. It happened 2 years ago. I was driving home from work when a truck ran a red light. I woke up in the hospital with both legs shattered. They told me I'd never walk again. Daniel's breath caught. I'm sorry, he said quietly. It's okay, she replied, though her voice wavered. I've learned to live with it. But people don't see me the same anymore. Not my friends. Not my fiancé. They start with pity and end with distance. Daniel sat down across from her, the weight of her words sinking deep. "He didn't leave because of you," he said firmly. "He left because he wasn't strong enough." Lily's eyes glistened, but she didn't argue. "I loved him, Daniel. I thought love was enough to keep us whole. But when I couldn't dance, couldn't hike, couldn't even walk down the aisle, he said he couldn't spend a lifetime pretending everything was okay." Daniel's jaw tightened. "He's the one pretending. You're the real thing." The words hung between them, raw and honest. For a moment, the air felt charged, not romantic, but deeply human. Two broken hearts recognizing the same pain. Later that night, when the apartment grew quiet, Daniel lay awake on the floor, staring at the ceiling. He could hear the faint rhythm of Lily's breathing from the couch, soft and unsteady. He closed his eyes, but instead of sleep, memories came. Claire's laughter echoing in the kitchen, the way she'd hum while folding laundry, the scent of her shampoo on rainy nights. He missed her so fiercely it still hurt to breathe. But tonight, that ache felt different. It wasn't just loss, it was empathy, connection, maybe even purpose. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the thin curtains. Ethan was the first to wake. He found Lily still asleep on the couch, her hand clutching the edge of the blanket like a child afraid to let go. For a moment, he just watched her, then quietly began making pancakes the way his dad did. Clumsy but sincere. When Daniel stepped into the kitchen, he froze surprised. "Making breakfast, huh?" Ethan grinned. "Figured she might be hungry. You always say food helps people feel better." Daniel smiled, ruffling his son's hair. "You're a good kid, you know that." When Lily stirred awake, the smell of pancakes filled the room. She blinked, groggy, and saw Ethan standing proudly with a plate in his hands. "Good morning," he said shyly. "I made these for you." Her lips curved into a small, genuine smile. "The first real one since last night." "You did. That's so sweet." Daniel poured her a cup of coffee. "Best chef in town," he said, winking at Ethan. As they sat together, laughter began to replace the silence. It was awkward, imperfect, but real. Lily told Ethan about her old job as a kindergarten teacher, about how much she missed the sound of kids laughing. Ethan, in turn, told her about his dream of becoming an engineer, just like Dad. Though Daniel chuckled at the exaggeration. For a brief morning, everything felt normal, almost peaceful. But peace never stayed long in Daniel's world. Just as Lily was thanking them for breakfast, a knock echoed through the door. It was sharp, impatient. Daniel frowned, drying his hands on a towel. When he opened it, a tall man in a suit stood outside, rain-spotted, eyes hollow with guilt. Lily's face drained of color. "Lily," the man said quietly, stepping forward. "Please, I just want to talk." Daniel's body went rigid. "You're the groom," he said, his tone turning cold. The man's eyes flicked toward him, then back to Lily. "I made a mistake, okay? I panicked. I shouldn't have left." Lily shook her head slowly, tears gathering in her eyes. "You didn't just leave, Andrew. You humiliated me. You left me in front of everyone." Andrew's voice cracked. "I know. I was scared. I didn't think I could handle." "Handle what?" Daniel cut in sharply. "Loving someone in a wheelchair." Andrew glared at him. "This doesn't concern you." "Actually," Daniel said, his voice steady, "it does. She was alone when you left her. Someone had to care." The tension in the room was thick enough to choke on. Lily's hands trembled on her lap, torn between anger and heartbreak. Andrew took a step closer. "Lily, please. Just give me a chance to explain. I was wrong." But Lily's voice cut through his apology like glass. "You don't get to come back just because guilt feels heavy, Andrew." Daniel watched her as she said it. Her voice strong, her eyes fierce. And in that moment, he realized she wasn't the same fragile bride he'd met in the rain. She was finding her strength again, piece by piece. Still, when Andrew turned to leave, something in Lily's face broke all over again. Daniel wanted to comfort her. But before he could move, she whispered, "I need some air," and wheeled herself toward the door, the morning light spilling around her like a fragile halo. And just like that, she was gone again. Out into a world that had taken everything from her but her courage. The air outside was sharp and cold, carrying that damp scent of rain-soaked earth. Lily wheeled herself slowly down the narrow street, the sunlight glinting faintly off the wet pavement. Her heart was pounding, not from fear, but from the surge of emotions that Andrew's sudden appearance had stirred. Behind her, Daniel stood by the door, torn between giving her space and running after her. He could still see her in the distance, her wedding dress, now dulled and tattered, billowing faintly in the breeze. "Dad." Ethan said softly from the kitchen doorway. Should we go after her? Daniel hesitated. Yeah, he finally said, grabbing his jacket. We should. He found her a few minutes later near the park, by the old fountain that hadn't worked in years. She sat there quietly, staring at the broken stone cherubs as if they held the answers to her questions. Lily. Daniel said gently, walking up beside her. She didn't turn at first. He said he panicked. She whispered. Like that makes it better. Daniel sat down on the edge of the fountain. Sometimes people panic when they see what love really costs. She looked at him then, her eyes red but dry. But I wasn't asking him for anything except to stay. Isn't that what love is supposed to mean? Staying even when it's hard. Daniel nodded slowly. It should. But some people think love is a feeling that fades when things get heavy. They don't understand it's a choice you make every day, even when the world falls apart. Lily's voice trembled. He made his choice. Yeah. Daniel said quietly. He did. A long silence followed. The town was waking up around them. Cars humming by, a dog barking in the distance, life going on as if her world hadn't just cracked open. Lily let out a shaky sigh. You know what the worst part is? I still loved him. Even after he left me there, I kept thinking maybe he'd come back. That maybe love would remind him who we were. Daniel's chest tightened. He understood too well that kind of hope. The one that lingers even after it hurts you. That doesn't make you weak, he said. It makes you human. She looked up at him then, her gaze softening. You talk like someone who's been through this. He smiled sadly. In my own way, yeah. When Claire got sick, I used to beg God to heal her. I told myself if I loved her enough she'd stay. But love doesn't stop death. It just makes you remember what you lost. Lily's voice dropped to a whisper. And yet, here you are. Still helping strangers in the rain. Daniel chuckled lightly. Maybe because someone once told me love isn't something you lose. It's something you pass on. That made her pause. She stared at him for a long moment, something unspoken flickering in her eyes, gratitude, admiration, perhaps even a glimmer of healing. Do you ever stop missing her? Lily asked. Daniel looked at the horizon. No. But I've learned to live with the missing. Lily smiled faintly, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. Maybe one day, I'll learn that too. He reached out, gently resting his hand over hers. You will. The touch was brief but grounding. Two broken souls finding steadiness in each other's presence. When they returned to the apartment, Ethan had set the table again. I made sandwiches, he announced proudly. Lily chuckled softly. You're quite the little host, aren't you? Ethan grinned. Dad says food fixes everything. Daniel smirked. I might have said that once or twice. As they ate, a sense of quiet warmth settled over them, fragile but comforting. Lily watched the easy banter between father and son. The way Daniel's roughness softened, when he looked at Ethan. The way Ethan's laughter carried light into every corner of the small room. It stirred something inside her. A longing she didn't expect. Later that afternoon, she asked Daniel if she could help around the house. You've done enough for me, she said. Let me do something for you. Daniel chuckled. You really think this place can be saved? Lily smirked. I've worked with preschoolers. Trust me, I've seen worse. They spent the next hour cleaning, sorting, laughing at small things. She teased him for his ancient toaster that barely worked. He teased her for her bossy teacher voice. For the first time since that awful night, Lily laughed. A real, unguarded laugh that filled the apartment like sunlight breaking through clouds. Ethan peeked from the hallway, watching the two of them. He smiled quietly. He hadn't seen his dad laugh like that in years. But as night fell, the weight of reality crept back in. Lily sat by the window, gazing at the city lights. I should find somewhere to go tomorrow, she said softly. You've done more than enough. Daniel frowned. You don't have to rush out. I do, she said gently. You and Ethan have your own life. I can't just stay here like a ghost haunting your kindness. He leaned against the wall, arms crossed. Lily, you're not a burden. She turned to him, eyes glimmering in the dim light. Maybe not now. But people get tired of helping. I've seen it. Daniel stepped closer. I'm not those people. Her breath hitched, caught between gratitude and fear. Why? Why are you doing all this for me, Daniel? He hesitated, then said quietly. Because when I saw you there in the rain, something inside me woke up. Something that had been asleep since Claire died. Maybe helping you isn't about fixing your pain. It's about reminding myself that love doesn't end when life breaks you. Lily blinked back tears. You talk like it's easy. He smiled sadly. It's not. But it's worth it. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The night stretched quiet and tender around them. Then Lily whispered, "You make it sound like I still have a future." Daniel met her gaze. "You do. You just haven't seen it yet." A single tear rolled down her cheek, and before she could stop herself, she reached for his hand. He didn't pull away. Outside, the last of the rain clouds drifted from the sky, revealing a crescent moon hanging low over the horizon. For the first time in a long while, both Daniel and Lily felt something they hadn't dared to feel. Peace. Not the kind that erased their pain, but the kind that made it bearable. But just as that peace began to take root, the world decided to test it. Because the next morning, when Daniel went to the garage where he worked, he was met with bad news. The owner was selling the shop. Everyone was being laid off. And suddenly, the fragile calm that had held his little world together began to tremble once more. The sound of the mechanic's drill still echoed faintly when Daniel stepped into the garage that morning. But it wasn't the usual chorus of engines, laughter, and clanging tools. Instead, there was silence. An uneasy, heavy kind that hung in the air like smoke. Mr. Gaines, the shop owner, stood near the office door, his hat in his hands. He looked up when Daniel entered. "Dan," he began softly, "I was hoping you'd come in early." Daniel's stomach sank. He already knew. The quiet, the way everyone avoided looking at him. It all said enough. "What's going on?" he asked, though the words came out flat. Mr. Gaines sighed, running a tired hand over his face. "The shop's done. Bank took the building. I tried to hold it off, but the bills." Daniel's mind went blank for a second. "You mean we're out of work?" "I'm sorry, son," Gaines said, his voice heavy. "You've been my best man here. But there's nothing I can do." Daniel swallowed hard, staring at the oil-stained floor beneath his boots. "I've got a kid, Gaines. Rent due in 3 days. I can't afford." "I know." The old man's eyes were wet. "If there was a way, I'd keep it open just for you. But the truth is, we're done." The words hit like a blow to the chest. For a moment, Daniel couldn't move, couldn't breathe. He just nodded mutely, shook the man's hand, and walked out into the gray morning light. Outside, the world kept moving. Cars passed, people chatted on sidewalks, a dog barked at a cyclist. It felt cruel how ordinary it all seemed while his world fell apart again. He sat in his truck for a long time, gripping the steering wheel, fighting back the tremor in his hands. He'd promised Ethan stability. He'd promised himself he'd never let his boy feel the kind of fear that now threatened to swallow him whole. And then there was Lily. Someone who had already lost everything. How could he tell her that now? So had he. When he finally drove home, the apartment looked strangely peaceful through the windshield. Inside, laughter echoed faintly. He opened the door to find Ethan sitting on the floor beside Lily, both focused on a puzzle spread across the coffee table. "Hey," Ethan said, looking up with excitement. "Lily's teaching me how to build the edge pieces first. She says that's how you find the picture faster." Lily smiled at him, her eyes bright, though there were still faint shadows of sadness beneath. "He's a fast learner. You've got a smart kid, Daniel." Daniel forced a smile. "Yeah. He gets it from his mom." Something in his voice made Lily look up. "Is everything okay?" He hesitated. He wanted to lie, to tell her everything was fine. But something about her calm, steady gaze made the truth spill out. "The shop's closing," he said quietly. "They're shutting it down." Ethan froze, the puzzle piece in his hand trembling slightly. "Does that mean you don't have a job anymore?" Daniel nodded slowly. "Not right now, buddy." The silence that followed was thick and heavy. Ethan looked down, his small voice barely audible. "We'll be okay though, right?" Daniel knelt beside him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Hey! We've been through worse, haven't we? We'll figure it out." Lily watched, her heart aching at the tenderness between them. She wanted to help, but what could she do? She had nothing. No money, no home, no strength beyond her words. That night, she sat by the window again, listening to Daniel pacing softly in the other room, whispering to himself as he calculated bills. The sound of quiet desperation was something she recognized too well. "Daniel," she said softly. He turned, startled. "Did I wake you?" She shook her head. "Couldn't sleep." He sighed, sitting across from her. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't be unloading all this in front of Ethan. Or you. You've already got enough to deal with." She studied him for a long moment. Do you ever let anyone help you? He gave a tired smile. Not really my strong suit. Well, it should be, she said firmly. You've done so much for me. Let me do something for you now. He shook his head. Lily, you don't owe me anything. She looked him dead in the eyes. It's not about owing. It's about caring. The word landed like a stone in a still pond. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Then Lily took a deep breath. I can help with tutoring, she said. I used to teach. Maybe I can earn something. And maybe you can fix things outside the shop. People always need help with their cars. You're too good not to find a way. Daniel frowned. You really think people around here can pay for that? Maybe not all of them, she admitted. But some will. You've got a good heart, Daniel. People notice that more than you think. He stared at her, the faintest spark of determination flickering to life in his eyes. You really believe that? I do, she said simply. I wouldn't still be here if I didn't. Over the next week, they began to build something. Small, fragile, but real. Daniel started fixing neighbors' cars in the parking lot. Lily helped with calls and scheduling, using her teacher's precision to organize the chaos. Ethan handed tools and fetched coffee, proudly calling it Brooks & Co. Mechanics. At first, there was little to show for it. A few tips, a handful of grateful smiles. But word spread. People trusted Daniel because he treated them like family, not customers. And they admired Lily. How she smiled despite the chair, how she worked with quiet strength. They became a team. And in that teamwork, something began to bloom. A connection that neither dared to name, but both felt deeply. One night, after Ethan had gone to bed, Daniel found Lily sitting on the porch, staring at the stars. He joined her quietly. You know, he said, you're the reason things are turning around. She looked at him, surprised. Me, Daniel, all I did was make a few phone calls. He shook his head. No. You reminded me what it's like to believe in something again. For a moment, she didn't answer. The wind rustled softly, carrying the faint scent of rain. Then she whispered, you did the same for me. Their eyes met in the dim porch light, and for the first time, neither of them looked away. But before either could speak, Ethan's voice drifted sleepily from inside. Dad, Daniel turned. Yeah, buddy. The boy rubbed his eyes. Is Lily gonna stay with us forever? The question caught both adults off guard. Daniel glanced at Lily, whose cheeks flushed with warmth. I don't know, Daniel said finally. Maybe forever starts with tomorrow. Ethan smiled drowsily and shuffled back to bed. Lily's heart swelled, a mix of hope and fear. She'd never expected to find something like this again. A home, a purpose, maybe even love. But fate, as it often did, wasn't done testing them. Because 2 days later, a letter arrived. One that would change everything. It was addressed to Lily. From her ex-fiancé. The envelope sat on the kitchen table like a wound that refused to close. The handwriting was unmistakable, neat, familiar, and trembling slightly at the edges. Andrew's handwriting. Lily stared at it for what felt like hours. Her fingers brushed the paper, cold and hesitant. But she couldn't bring herself to open it. Every part of her wanted to throw it away, to pretend it didn't exist. Yet some quiet voice inside whispered that she needed to face it. To finally end the ghost that had been haunting her heart. Daniel walked in, wiping grease from his hands with a rag. He noticed the envelope and froze. From him. Lily nodded, her expression unreadable. Do you want me to? He began. No, she said softly. I need to do this. He hesitated but nodded, stepping back as she carefully broke the seal. The sound of tearing paper felt louder than it should. Inside was a single folded letter, written in Andrew's familiar, slanted script. She took a deep breath and began to read aloud. Her voice quiet and trembling to Lily. I know I'm the last person you want to hear from. And I wouldn't blame you if you never forgive me. I left you because I was a coward. I told myself I couldn't handle your wheelchair. But the truth is, I couldn't handle what your strength made me see in myself. You loved me without conditions. And I only knew how to love when things were easy. I hated the man I saw in the mirror after I walked away from you. I thought about coming back that night. But by the time I found the courage, it was too late. You once told me that love doesn't need perfection. It just needs presence. I see now what that meant. You were right. I threw away something sacred. I heard about the man who helped you that night. Please tell him, thank you. Because of him, I hope you found someone who knows what I never did. That you are not broken. You are American. Andrew, Lily's voice broke on the last line. Her hands shook as she folded the letter back up, tears spilling freely now. Daniel didn't say anything at first. He just watched her. Watched the weight of the past finally loosen its grip on her shoulders. He's right, Daniel said quietly after a long silence. You are a miracle. Lily looked up at him, eyes shining with grief and gratitude all at once. Maybe once, I wanted to hear that from him. But now hearing it from you means something else entirely. Daniel stepped closer, gently taking the letter from her trembling hands. You don't owe him forgiveness, Lily. You've already moved beyond what he could ever understand. She nodded slowly, her voice a whisper. I think I finally believe that. Later that evening, when the sun dipped behind the rooftops and painted the room in amber light, Lily sat with Ethan, helping him finish a school project. Daniel watched from the doorway, his heart heavy with something that felt like peace and love he hadn't dared to feel in years. Ethan laughed as Lily showed him how to draw constellations on the cardboard. Look, he said proudly. I made the Big Dipper. Lily smiled, her eyes soft. That one's special. It's supposed to show you where the North Star is. People used to follow it home. Daniel's voice came from behind them, low and thoughtful. Seems we all could use a North Star once in a while. Lily turned, meeting his gaze. Maybe we already found ours. He smiled faintly, but the emotion in his eyes said more than words ever could. As weeks passed, life began to take shape in new ways. Daniel's small repair business grew faster than he expected. Neighbors trusted him. Strangers came from nearby towns, drawn by word of mouth, not just for his skill, but for the kindness that lingered in his workshop. And Lily, she started tutoring children again. Parents came by, grateful for her patience and gentle teaching. She'd sit in her wheelchair beside the whiteboard, laughter spilling through the small room like light through a window. Ethan adored her. He'd wait for her lessons to end so he could tell her about his day, or ask her questions about stars and heroes and life. One afternoon, Daniel came home to find Lily and Ethan planting flowers in the small patch of earth behind the apartment. Her hands were covered in soil, her hair messy, and she was laughing so hard she barely noticed him watching. Looks like I'm being replaced, Daniel teased, leaning against the doorframe. She looked up, grinning. You snooze, you lose. Ethan's the real boss here. The boy beamed proudly. We're making a miracle garden. Eh, what? Daniel chuckled. Lily smiled, brushing dirt off her fingers. A place where broken things can grow again. Something about those words struck him deep. He stepped closer, crouching beside her. Then I guess I belong here too. Her laughter faded into something gentler, an understanding that words couldn't touch. That night, after Ethan had gone to bed, Lily rolled out onto the porch. The sky was clear, the stars sharp and endless. Daniel joined her, sitting quietly by her side. You ever think about how life brings people together in the strangest ways? She asked softly. Every day, he said. Especially since the night I found you in the rain. She smiled faintly. You didn't find me, Daniel. We found each other. He looked at her for a long moment, his eyes glimmering with that same quiet strength that had drawn her in from the start. Maybe so. But I'm the lucky one. Her voice trembled. You really think so? He reached out, taking her hand. I don't think. I know. For a moment, the world was still. The sound of crickets, the faint hum of distant traffic, the warmth of two souls finally finding home. Then Daniel leaned forward, resting his forehead gently against hers. You're my miracle. He whispered again, the same words he'd said that night in the rain. But this time, they weren't born from pity or pain. They were a vow. Tears filled Lily's eyes. Not from sadness, but from something purer, stronger. And you're mine, she whispered back. They stayed there like that, the stars burning quietly above them, two broken hearts stitched together not by perfection, but by grace. In the months that followed, Daniel's business flourished. Lily's tutoring center grew into a small community hub. Ethan thrived, laughing, learning, dreaming bigger than ever before. And every year, when the first rain of spring fell, Daniel and Lily would step outside, lift their faces to the sky, and let it wash over them, reminding them of the night everything changed. Because sometimes miracles don't arrive wrapped in light.